My name is Casey Pritchard, and while my mother was explaining to her country club friends that I worked some vague government desk job, honestly, we don't really talk about it, I was authorizing the seizure of $847 million in cartel assets across 3 continents. The lies my family told about me had become a kind of white noise. At Thanksgiving 2 years ago, my Aunt Diane had introduced me to her friends as our Casey, still trying to figure things out. I was 42 years old. I'd been with the Bureau for 19 years. I'd run the Financial Crimes Division for the last 6. But I didn't correct her. I never did. My youngest brother, Trevor, was the golden child. He owned a mid-sized shopping mall in Riverside Sheffield Plaza, named after our mother's maiden name. He'd bought it 8 years ago with family money and a loan from our father, and he never let anyone forget it. At every family gathering, Trevor arrived in whatever luxury car he'd just leased, always 15 minutes late, always making an entrance. I drove a 7-year-old Honda Civic. It was paid off, fuel efficient, and didn't attract attention. Essential qualities when you spent your professional life tracking financial criminals who'd kill you for significantly less than the cost of Trevor's watch collection. Practical, my mother called it, in that tone that meant disappointing. The Sunday dinners were the worst. Every other week, mandatory attendance at my parents' house in San Marino. My father had made his money in medical device manufacturing, enough to retire comfortably, enough to fund Trevor's various business ventures, enough to maintain the fiction that our family was somehow special. 3 weeks ago, I'd sat at that dinner table while Trevor held court about his expansion plans. The anchor tenant just renewed for another decade, he announced, swirling his wine. Nordstrom, I negotiated it myself. We're projecting a 12% revenue increase over the next fiscal year. My father beamed. That's my son, business acumen. It's in the blood. Unlike some people, my sister Bethany muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, made decent money, and wore it like armor. Some of us had to find real careers. I cut my chicken, said nothing. Casey, honey, my mother's voice had that edge of concern that was really criticism. Are you still with that agency? Don't they have any opportunities for advancement? I mean, at your age. I'm doing fine, Mom. It's just that Trevor was saying you could probably get a job at the mall. Retail management, maybe. It would be steadier income, benefits, and a family business. She smiled like she'd just solved all my problems. Trevor smirked. I mean, I'd have to check with HR, but sure, we're always hiring. Might need to start at associate level, but I'm good where I am, I said. Where exactly is that? Bethany leaned forward. You never actually say what you do. It's always government work, or paperwork, or some vague non-answer. It's honestly weird, Casey. What are you hiding? That you're embarrassed? The truth was, I'd told them, once, 12 years ago, when I'd first made senior special agent. I'd explained that I worked in financial crimes, that I tracked money laundering operations, that I couldn't discuss active cases. My father had nodded politely and changed the subject. My mother had asked if it was dangerous, like in the movies. Trevor had laughed and said something about desk jockeys. After that, they'd simply rewritten the narrative. In their minds, I became the disappointing daughter who'd wasted her expensive education on some forgettable government position, the one who couldn't afford nice things, the one who didn't understand how the real world worked. It was easier than accepting they didn't understand what I did. Last month, I'd shown up to my nephew's graduation party in a dress I'd bought at a consignment shop in Pasadena. Kate Spade, gently used, $40. It was navy blue, perfectly appropriate, fit well. Bethany had taken one look and sniffed. Thrift shopping now? Jesus, Casey! It's vintage. It's sad, she turned to our cousin Rachel. Remember when we were kids and we thought Casey was going to be the successful one? Straight A's, full scholarship? Now look at her. Quote, but it was Trevor's comment, delivered with that particular smile he'd perfected, sympathetic and superior all at once, that stuck with me. I make one phone call, sis, one call, and I can get you an interview for mall security. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. Better than whatever you're doing now. I'd smiled back. I'll keep that in mind. The thing about working financial crimes at the federal level is that you learn to see patterns. Money flows like water, and it always leaves traces. Trevor's Mall had come across my desk 3 months ago, not as a target, but as a data point in a larger investigation. We'd been tracking a Ukrainian organized crime syndicate with ties to commercial real estate. They specialized in purchasing legitimate businesses as fronts for laundering money from cybercrime operations. The algorithm had flagged Sheffield Plaza as a potential acquisition target, mid-sized, stable revenue, family-owned, and, critically, financially leveraged beyond its actual value. I'd recused myself immediately, of course, protocol, but I'd watched the case file develop from a distance, the way you can't help watching a car accident in slow motion. The syndicate had made an approach. Trevor, in his infinite wisdom, had turned them down, not because he suspected anything criminal, but because he'd been holding out for a better offer. He'd told my father about it at dinner 6 weeks ago, framing it as his, quote, sharp negotiating instincts. The syndicate had moved on, but the analysis remained in the system. Sheffield Plaza was over-leveraged by 30%. Trevor had refinanced twice in 4 years, each time pulling out equity to fund his lifestyle. The cars, the watches, the annual ski trips to Aspen. The mall's revenue was steady, but the margins were thin. One bad quarter, one anchor tenant leaving, and the whole structure would collapse. I'd known this for months. I hadn't said anything. Then 2 weeks ago, I'd gotten the call about the Castellano seizure. Marcus Castellano had been on our watch list for 6 years. He ran one of the most sophisticated financial fraud operations on the West Coast: cryptocurrency pump and dumps, securities fraud, real estate flipping schemes. We'd been building the case slowly, carefully, until we had something that would stick. When we finally moved, we moved hard. 18 months of surveillance, 6 months of grand jury testimony, and a 42-count indictment. The judge had authorized seizure of all assets purchased with proceeds from criminal activity. That included a portfolio of commercial properties, including Sheffield Plaza. Castellano had approached Trevor 9 months ago through a shell company, Meridian Holdings LLC. Trevor had been so proud of that sale. He'd celebrated for weeks. Finally sold off 30% equity to a private investment firm. He'd announced at Christmas dinner. Real players. They saw the value I'd been building. He'd used the cash to buy a Tesla and a timeshare in Cabo. The shell company was owned by another shell company, which was owned by a Panamanian corporation, which was ultimately controlled by Castellano. We traced every link in the chain. The money Trevor had received was, legally speaking, proceeds of fraud, which meant the equity Castellano had purchased was subject to seizure, which meant the federal government now owned 30% of Sheffield Plaza. I could have let it play out through normal channels. The U.S. Marshals would have eventually contacted Trevor, explained the situation, offered him the opportunity to buy back the seized equity at fair market value. But then Bethany had called me last Tuesday. Mom's planning a thing, she'd said, that tone in her voice that meant I was being voluntarily volunteered. A celebration for Trevor. He's being honored by the Chamber of Commerce, Young Entrepreneur of the Year, or some bullshit. She wants to do it at the mall, make it a big public event. She's inviting everyone. And she specifically told me to tell you to dress appropriately for once. When? This Saturday, 2 in the afternoon, main atrium. There's going to be press, local politicians, the works. Mom's in full show-off mode. Bethany paused. You're coming, right? Because she'll make it a whole thing if you don't, and honestly, I can't deal with that drama. I'll be there. And Casey? Maybe borrow something nice to wear? Just for Mom's sake? Quote, I'd hung up and stared at my phone for a long moment. Then I'd made 2 calls. The first was to the U.S. Marshal Service, Assets Forfeiture Division. I need to accelerate the Sheffield Plaza notification. Personal conflict of interest that needs resolution before the public announcement. The second was to our Legal Affairs Division. I need to exercise my right under the Asset Purchase Act. I want to submit a sealed bid for the Castellano commercial holdings, specifically the Sheffield Plaza equity. There were forms. There were always forms. But I'd been in government long enough to know how to navigate the bureaucracy. The Asset Purchase Act allowed federal law enforcement employees to purchase seized assets at auction, provided they paid fair market value and could demonstrate no conflict of interest with the underlying criminal case. I hadn't investigated Castellano, I hadn't built the case, I'd simply authorized the final seizure, a signature on a document, nothing more. The fair market value of 30% equity in an over-leveraged shopping mall was less than most people thought, certainly less than Trevor believed it was worth. I'd spent 19 years living below my means. My salary as an FBI director was public record, $183,000 base, plus locality adjustments. I'd saved aggressively, invested carefully, and avoided the lifestyle inflation that trapped so many of my colleagues. I could afford it. But that wasn't where the real money came from. The Bureau's Asset Forfeiture Fund had a provision that most people didn't know about, a performance bonus system for senior officials in financial crimes units. When your division successfully seized and liquidated criminal assets, a small percentage, 0.1%, went into a pool distributed among the leadership team. Over 6 years running the Financial Crimes Division, we'd seized $178 billion in assets. Do the math. I'd quietly accumulated $178 million in bonus compensation, all perfectly legal, all taxed appropriately, all sitting in a diversified portfolio that I never touched and never discussed. My family thought I was shopping at Goodwill because I was poor. I was shopping at Goodwill because wealth that announces itself is wealth that attracts attention, and attention was the last thing someone in my position needed. Saturday arrived with perfect California weather, 72 degrees, crystalline blue sky, the kind of day that made San Marino feel like a postcard of itself. I wore the navy consignment dress again. If Bethany wanted to make a comment, she could make it twice. The mall's main atrium had been transformed. There was a stage set up near the fountain, clusters of white chairs arranged in rows, a banner reading, "Sheffield Plaza celebrates excellence." Local news crews were setting up cameras. I counted maybe 200 people. City council members, Chamber of Commerce types, family friends, my mother's entire social circle. Trevor was holding court near the stage, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. My father stood beside him, beaming. My mother was directing the caterers with the intensity of a military operation. Bethany spotted me first. "Oh good, you came. And you wore that dress again. Fantastic." "It's my favorite." "Clearly." She air-kissed near my cheek. "Try to look happy, okay? This is Trevor's big day." I found a seat in the back row, away from the family section. A few people glanced at me. Trevor's weird sister, the one nobody really understood. I smiled blandly and checked my phone. The U.S. Marshals had confirmed the transfer at 9 a.m. this morning. The paperwork was filed. The equity was officially mine, held under my personal LLC Pritchard Holdings, a company name generic enough to avoid immediate recognition. Trevor had no idea. Nobody did. The ceremony started at 2:15 p.m., fashionably late. The chamber president gave a speech about entrepreneurship and community vision. The mayor said something about economic development. Trevor accepted a crystal plaque and gave a speech about his journey, his vision, his commitment to excellence. "None of this would be possible without family," he said, gesturing to where my parents sat in the front row. My father, who taught me everything about business. My mother, who always believed in me. A deliberate pause. And my sisters and brother, who supported me in their own ways. Polite laughter. I felt Bethany glance back at me, checking for my reaction. I was texting my deputy director about an unrelated case. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Champagne and catered hors d'oeuvre. Clusters of congratulations. My mother's friends taking turns, telling Trevor how proud they must be. What an accomplishment. Such a bright future. I hung back near the fountain, eating a surprisingly good crab cake and watching the social choreography. My mother found me first. "Casey, there you are." She glanced at my dress with that expression, disappointment so familiar it had lost its sting. I thought you might make an effort today. This is nice dress, Mom. It's practical. The same tone she used for my car. Anyway, Trevor's about to do the investor meet and greet. You should at least come say congratulations properly. As a family. The investor meet and greet was happening in one of the empty retail spaces, a former bookstore, now a hollow shell waiting for a new tenant. Trevor had set it up as a casual networking space, trying to attract more private investment, more partners, more validation. I followed my mother inside. 20 or so people milled around, local businessmen, a few real estate developers, some of Trevor's friends who fancied themselves entrepreneurs. Trevor was in the center, naturally, explaining his expansion plans. We're looking at acquiring the adjacent lot, maybe adding a boutique hotel component. It's all about creating a destination experience, not just a shopping center. I stood near the back, half listening. Bethany materialized at my elbow. You know, you could at least try to look interested. This is important to him. I'm here, aren't I? Physically, but you've got that face. I'm too smart for this room. Face you always do? I don't have a face. You absolutely have a face. You've had it since high school. It's why people think you're stuck up. She sipped her champagne. Maybe if you smiled more, seemed more approachable, you wouldn't still be single and... Still shopping at Goodwill? I offered. She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I'm just saying, you don't have to be so resistant to help. Trevor's offer was genuine. Mall security, it's honest work. Better than whatever vague thing you do now. I was considering my response when Trevor's voice cut through the ambient noise. Casey! There she is! He was grinning, gesturing me forward. Everyone, my sister Casey. She works for the government. Does something with paperwork, I think. We're still not entirely sure. Laughter. Good-natured, dismissive. I walked forward, smile fixed. Seriously, though, Trevor continued, arm around my shoulders in a gesture that was meant to look affectionate but felt condescending. Casey's the smart one in the family. Full scholarship to Georgetown, we all thought she'd be running the world by now. He squeezed my shoulder. Life doesn't always work out the way we plan, right, sis? More laughter, sympathetic this time. But hey, he stage whispered to the group, I told her if she ever needs a job, I can set her up with our security team. Family discount on the uniform. The laughter was louder now. My mother, standing near the front, looked pained, embarrassed by me, embarrassed for me. Trevor turned to me directly, still smiling. Still shopping at Goodwill? God, that's depressing. He adjusted his Rolex. The new one, rose gold, probably $30,000. I could take you to a real store sometime, as charity. The room had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. This was the moment. The public humiliation disguised as brotherly teasing, the reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. I pulled out my phone, opened the email I'd prepared last night, turned the screen toward Trevor. That's odd, I said, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. But your business, the shopping mall, is now mine. I bought it anonymously in the name of my company. Trevor's smile didn't fade immediately. It took a few seconds for the words to register, for his brain to process what I'd said. He laughed, uncertain, looking to the crowd for validation that this was a joke. What are you talking about? I turned the phone so others could see. The email from the U.S. Marshals, the transfer documentation, the LLC registration. Sheffield Plaza. You sold 30% equity to Meridian Holdings 9 months ago. Meridian Holdings was a shell company owned by Marcus Castellano, who was indicted for securities fraud 6 weeks ago. His assets were seized by the federal government. I purchased the seized equity yesterday. Legally, I now own 30% of your mall. Trevor's face went through several colors. That's not possible. It's actually very possible. It's also public record as of this morning. You can check with your attorney, though I should tell you that as a minority equity holder, I now have access to all financial records, board votes, and operational decisions. I paused. And based on my preliminary review, you're over-leveraged by 30% and one bad quarter away from default. You might want to reconsider that hotel expansion. The room was frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. My mother's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the silence. Trevor was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. You bought. How did you even? I'm the director of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, I said simply. I've held that position for 6 years. My salary is public record, $183,000 base, but I also receive performance bonuses based on asset seizures my division executes. Over 6 years, that's accumulated to roughly $178 million. I slipped my phone back into my purse. I don't shop at Goodwill because I'm poor, Trevor. I shop there because I don't need to prove anything to anyone, unlike some people. Bethany had gone pale. My father looked like he'd been struck. My mother was just staring, her mouth slightly open. So about that job offer, I continued, my voice pleasant, conversational. I think I'll pass on mall security. But I appreciate the thought, very generous. Trevor's legs seemed to give out. He sat down heavily on one of the display benches, still staring at me. Someone's phone chimed, then another. Within seconds, half the room was checking their devices, pulling up the public records, confirming what I'd just said, watching my entire family's social foundation crumble in real time. The mayor was reading something on his phone, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to carefully neutral. I looked at my brother one more time. I'll have my attorney send over the partnership paperwork. We should probably schedule a board meeting to discuss the financial restructuring. I have some thoughts about the operational inefficiencies. Then I turned and walked out of the empty storefront, through the atrium where the celebration banners still hung, past the reporters who were starting to figure out that a much more interesting story had just unfolded. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, thin and confused, that she said she worked in paperwork. I drove home in my practical Honda Civic, listening to NPR, and didn't think about it again until Monday morning when my deputy director knocked on my office door. Your brother's attorney called, she said, trying not to smile, 3 times. He seems very eager to discuss your hostile takeover of a family business. It's not hostile, it's equity participation. He also used the words betrayal and you'll be hearing from the ethics board. Tell him the ethics board already cleared the purchase. Federal employees can buy seized assets at fair market value. It's literally in the handbook. I signed off on a warrant request. Anything else? Just that you're terrifying and I'm glad we're on the same side. I smiled. That's the nicest thing anyone's said to me all week. That evening, Bethany called. I almost didn't answer. I don't know what to say, she started. Then don't say anything. Trevor's losing his mind. Mom won't stop crying. Dad locked himself in his office. Okay, that's it? You just destroyed our family's reputation and you say, okay? I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline. I didn't destroy anything, Bethany. I bought a legitimate business asset at fair market value. If that destroyed your reputation, maybe your reputation was built on something pretty fragile to begin with. Silence on the other end. For the record, I continued, I told you all what I did 12 years ago. You just didn't believe it was important enough to remember. You never said you were the director. You never said you made millions. You never asked. You assumed. There's a difference. More silence. Are you really going to keep the equity? She finally asked. Yes. Why? Just to prove a point? I thought about that. No, because it's a good investment. And because maybe Trevor needs to learn that not everyone will enable his delusions about his own competence. I paused. Also because I can. You've changed. No, I said. I just stopped letting you ignore who I actually am. She hung up. I didn't hear from my parents for 3 weeks. When my mother finally called, her voice was careful, formal. Your father and I think it would be best if we took some time apart, as a family. Okay. Trevor is very hurt. He feels betrayed. I understand. Do you? Her voice cracked slightly. Do you understand that you humiliated your brother in front of the entire city? That we can't show our faces at the club anymore? Mom, I bought a minority stake in a shopping mall. If that humiliated him, it's because his identity was built on the idea of being successful without having earned it. That's not my fault. You didn't have to do it so publicly, so cruelly. He publicly mocked me, I said quietly. For years, all of you did. You just never thought I'd be in a position to do anything about it. She was quiet for a long time. I don't know who you are anymore. Yeah, I said. I know. The mall is doing fine, by the way. I brought in a real management consultant, restructured the debt, renegotiated some of the vendor contracts. Trevor still runs day-to-day operations. I'm a silent partner, mostly, but now there's actual financial oversight. He doesn't speak to me. None of them do. I'm okay with that. Last week, I was shopping at the same Goodwill where I'd found the navy dress. I found a vintage Burberry trench coat, barely worn, $75. It fit perfectly. The cashier smiled as she rang it up. Someone's getting a great deal today. Yeah, I said. I really